Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, and today I'm hanging out with John from Kids on Bikes, the RPG. Um,
Hello.
how are you doing today?
Good, good. How are you doing?
Good. And first off, I want to congratulate you because you have a very successful Kickstarter going on right now.
Thank you very much. We're really excited. Doug and I didn't fully expect this to happen, so we were just excited to get it out there, and the success has been very pleasant.
So your actual company though is Infectious Play, is that correct?
Well, that's the name of my kind of development company. We're working with Hunter's Books. They're actually going to be publishing it.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So Ivan, I was wondering what his involvement was.
yeah. I met Ivan a couple years ago, and we've talked online a bunch. And at Gen Con this year, I was walking by him in the hall, and I stopped and said hello to him in person because I don't think we've ever met face to face. And we were talking for a few minutes, and he asked what I was working on, and I was kind of scrolling through my list of projects on my phone, and he saw Kids on Bikes, and he's like, "What's that?" And I was telling him, and I showed him the art that we had done for it. Doug and I were going to kickstart it ourselves. But I definitely don't want to be a board game publisher. But I figured since this is just kind of a one-off project, it wouldn't be so bad to, handle it myself. And
Do you
Ivan
mean
saw. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
do you mean RPG publisher?
Well, no. I kind of come from the board game realm, and that's why I started Infectious Play was for board games.
Mhm.
But I didn't want to be. I don't want to be a board game publisher, so I figured, well, maybe I'll just run this one RPG campaign, and I'll publish that, and it won't be as much work as much involvement as if I was doing board games because I didn't want to be involved in publishing those. Um, so when Ivan saw it, he said, "Have you shown this to anybody yet?" And I said, "No. We didn't really think anybody would be super interested in it since I'm not known in the RPG world." And he said, "Don't show this to anybody else, and let's talk after Gen Con." So we did that, and we came on board with them, and then they took over the publishing aspect of it.
We just had Ivan on not that long ago. He's a
Oh
good
yeah,
guy.
for Outbreak Undead.
Yeah. I actually first appeared as a cameo when we had Satine Phoenix on, and it was like the day after her birthday, and there were still like lingering bodies. um, but yeah, he's definitely a good dude, and
Yeah.
we got to meet him when we went out to LA. So, how long have you been working on this RPG? I mean, right now there's this like resurgence with like things from the 80s.
hmm So we started on it right after Stranger Things season 1 came out. Um, I just got done watching it, and I immediately started on a Stranger Things board game. Um, because that it inspired me. I really loved it, and I was like, "Oh, I want to do this. I want to do something in this world, or that felt like this world." And then Doug posted, "Hey, does anyone want to design a Stranger Things board game?" And I responded to him. I was like, "Well, I'm already working on a board game with somebody else, but what if we do an RPG instead?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm on board. That sounds awesome." So we started working on it hardcore right away. And then over the last year and a half, we've been testing it, putting it through its paces, making sure everything works the way we want it to, and that we're happy with the content and the art and all the mechanisms, things like that. So just a little bit over a year and a half, I think.
So, what is the core mechanics for the game?
Well, we went with we wanted it to feel or have. One of the things we loved about Stranger Things was that it kind of emulated D&D in the TV series without like getting into the mechanics of it. So like we wanted it to be. At first, we were kind of like coming up with these like convoluted dice systems, and playing off from like the old school D&D THAC0 and stuff like that. But then at one point, I was just kind of one of us was moving parts around on our table, and we were like, well, what if each one of your stats was a different polyhedral? And then whenever you needed to use that stat, you just rolled that polyhedral for success. And we're like, all right, well, that's a pretty drastic swing in power from a D4 to a D20. But it sounds like a neat system. And then we were like, well, what if the dice exploded? And we're like, oh, well, that would make a D4 so you could succeed with it. And it would be like this really epic moment, having a D4 roll a 4 3 times in a row to hit a success. And we're like, well, there's still this pretty big power gap with a D20. So we said, well, what if you could, if it wasn't like an under pressure situation, you could always just like take half value for a dice roll. So that's kind of the core dice mechanic, is that dice can explode and you can always take half of a dice roll instead of even rolling a die. So if you're really good at something and you're trying to do something that's not super challenging, you'll just succeed at it. Because we didn't want the dice mechanics to get in the way of the story. We wanted them to give us big story moments instead. And then we decided to make the success and failure system kind of granular. And in that way, like if you fail by like 1 or 2 or 3 points, it's nowhere near as bad as if you like massively fail and biff. And same on the succeeding side, because that's something I really liked about systems like Shadowrun, is that the bigger your success, the more control you had over it. So that kind of factors into things. And then kind of the other thing we think is really interesting and has gotten people excited is, we said that these stories always have, not always, but like in things like the Goonies and E.T. and, other stories, there's always this character that has powers. And we're like, well, everybody's going to want to be the powered character. So how do we make it fair? Like, do we just say one person can be powered, or do you have it where anybody can be powered and people are just going to make these stories that aren't anywhere near as fun and challenging? Because then it's not about like normal kids overcoming adversity. It's about a bunch of powered kids like doing whatever. So we were like, well, what if the powered character was controlled by everybody? So, part of the world of creation is that the GM comes up with a powered character and then assigns different aspects of it to each of the players. So everybody has control of it in different ways.
And so how does that mechanic work? I'm kind of curious how, is it a free-for-all? Who's going to decide what the power character does? Or is there a mechanic specifically designed to do that?
No, there's mechanics specifically for it. So each player has control over a different aspect of the powered character. Like somebody has control over how they interact with the group, or somebody has control over how they interact with adults. And you just kind of, when you want the powered character to do something, you just tap the card of the player who controls that aspect of the powered character. So even if you control how the powered character gets to use their powers, any one of us can be like, well, I think it's time, and then you need to narrate what it does.
So I must say, like, I was a little skeptical of the idea of the powered character. And so I'm like kind of like walking through it in my brain as you're talking. And I'm thinking about, movies from the 80s, because clearly this is kind of like this genre is based off of that, essentially.
Yeah,
and so,
absolutely.
So in my brain, I go, okay, well, you have the Goonies, and they had Lump, and you had maybe not super powered, but compared to the Goonies, anyway.
Oh yeah.
And E.T. obviously you had E.T. and then Stranger Things you have 11. So I'm like, okay, I see how this could definitely be a thing, and could work. So what kind of stories are you guys telling with the system now, or do you envision being told with it?
Well, part of it is that we didn't want it to have a baked-in setting. So we kind of took inspiration from the Powered by Apocalypse games, where we made setting or building the world or your town essentially a collaborative thing. So you all take turns answering questions about the town and talking about, like one of my favorite things is everybody takes turns describing a rumor that they've heard about the town. Because that's an exciting thing as a kid. Like everybody knows these rumors about like, oh yeah, old man Jenkins' house is haunted and nobody goes there. You know, if you lose your ball in the backyard of the Sandlot, you don't ever get it back. So everybody builds this world of mystery in the town and then gets to explore it however they want. One of the things that we've been kind of unlocking is these modules. And Doug and I each have a module in the game. And those are kind of like quick play settings where we kind of describe a town, give you some questions to answer about that town. So you still are building your own version of it. And then we have some baked in like points of interest and NPCs. And we kind of like build up what the monster is in the module.
Do you want to mention some of those people for the stretch goals that have been unlocked so far? They're going to be writing for you guys.
Oh man, we unlocked all 10 of our original stretch goals. And I'll just kind of go down the list real quick. We have a ton of awesome people. Scott Woodard, who did the 6-gun role-playing game. Eliza Teague, who works for Lone Shark Games, and she worked on Betrayal, House on the Hill, Widow's Walk. Kevin Culp, who does a lot of work for Peladrin Press. Banana Chan, who's a good friend of Dud's and mine. She does more LARP style things, but she's doing it. It's her module is called Dads on Mowers, which we fell in love with the name immediately. Let's see, Epidiah Ravishal, and the co-designer of Dread. Ross Watson, who does Savage Rifts. Let's see, who else? Matthew Colville, who does writing for Dark Horse Publishing. Jim Zub, we got him because he was one of our early playtesters because I know Jim through some other projects. And he writes, he's writing one of the current Avengers titles for Marvel. And he writes a comic book called Wayward, which is just this incredible, a comic book about teens in Japan. We got Sen Foon Lim, who's a board game designer and good friend of ours. And Amanda Hammond-Coons, which is one of the co-creators of Starfinder.
Yeah, so yeah, I was definitely impressed when I saw the lineup. And the first person, I didn't like recognize the name, but then I saw the picture. I'm like, oh, I know that guy. I met him at a Gen Con at the Alpha Party last year. And then Matt Colville is a huge name in the D&D community. The time we had him on our live chat show, they literally started showing up at like 8 o'clock in the morning, like it was a Grateful Dead concert, and hanging out in the chat.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. Ivan's definitely brought some of the big names with him, and his contacts, and a lot of them are friends of ours and people that we've met in the industry. So it's really nice to be able to work with people that we just love spending time with, anyways.
I had this mixed feeling because I've been looking at several different games, and now they seem to be throwing out the woodwork, but I had the mixed feeling about role playing as a child in a game. Seems a little weird. And the other thing too, in today's political climate and environment, role playing a child from the 80s is a really weird thought to me, because when I think back to my own childhood growing up in the 80s, that was definitely not acceptable. And Stranger Things season 2 actually slipped in something I was kind of surprised they put in there, but was definitely like an 80isms. And in case you guys haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it. You guys can figure it out for yourselves. So do you feel like there's challenges there?
I definitely think there are, but I think it's really up to the group, and we kind of have a little bit of discussions about that in the rule book. Because one of the big things in role playing now is like making sure that you respect everybody's boundaries, and that that everybody at the table feels safe in it. So one of my favorite movies growing up is Monster Squad. I loved it, but like going back and watching it as an adult, like there are some things in that that aren't necessarily things that I want to discuss with my kids about. About how we used to use a lot of derogatory terms that are not acceptable anymore. But I think I'm just one of those things. You you just don't have to focus on those. Like, that was the way it is, but it doesn't have to be. Like, you can still be like teenagers who, you know, think it's cool to cuss a little bit, but you don't have to necessarily be, you know, spouting epitaphs that aren't cool because that's the way it was.
We were just in the 80s as kids. We were just assholes. That's all I can
absolutely
get down to.
Yeah, and I think if we focus on the positive things, then, you know, we tell a better story generally. But, you know, if there's a group that wants to explore the other aspects of it and, you know, make that be an issue that's being addressed in the game, then if the group's comfortable with that and it's, you know, still, you know, addressing the issues in a way that's not, you know, punching down, I think there's still power in those kind of stories.
So Rep Brock has a question for you. Where do you find someone to do your art? Because the art is fantastic. Love that style.
Oh, well, it's actually our mutual friends, Nicole and Anthony, that put us on to Heather Vaughn. We asked on Facebook, we're like, hey, we're working on an RPG and we need some artists. And we kind of talked about, you know, the general feeling of the RPG. And one of the kind of the touchstone pieces of art was a comic book series called Paper Girls that I'm in love with. So I was like, I want an artist that can kind of do this style, but in their own way and make it look like that. So Nicole and Anthony sent us Heather's information and the price was reasonable. So we, you know, hit it off right away and started working with her.
Facebook and networking, essentially.
Yep.
You know, the funny thing is when you see different memes going around and different things on social media about shows like Stranger Things, and people are like, I can't, this isn't realistic. Parents wouldn't really do that. Kids don't really go off like that. And it is kind of funny how even now as a parent in this day and age with my own children compared to when we were growing up as a kids, and literally like I remember being pushed out the door and hearing the door click behind me, you know, with the lock, and it's like, don't come back until dinner.
Yeah, and I think a part of it is I live in a very small town, so we still try to do that with our kids. Like we can, you know, like I let my kids walk to the store last night, which is like, you know, a quarter or 3/4 of a mile away, because they want to go to the store, and I'm like, whatever. And you know, it was almost dark, and it's a small town, so you know, I try not to buy into the paranoia too much, but definitely the appeal of the 80s and that world that we used to have is definitely a powerful thing. And to talk a little bit more about the playing kids in the role-playing game, we do have where you can play teens and or adults. But we definitely suggest that like the whole group isn't adults, because that's just not. I mean, if that's the story you want to tell, that's fine, but it's not as much fun. Because the adults kind of have drawbacks of like, they're pretty boring. They have work and other things. You know, they're not going to be running around during the day when the town's quiet and everybody's, you know, at their jobs. But we did want to be able to tell stories, you know, like Stranger Things, where there's, you know, the teens are running around and the kids are running around, and there's, you know, an adult that's trying to help solve the mystery too.
Yeah, I definitely saw that in the blurbs on the Kickstarter, which is it's all very well written. And yeah, I was talking with one of the Twitch streamers I know, Unmade Gaming, and we were talking about these type of games. I guess we were talking about the Loop, which is different but similar conceptually. And you know, it really took me a little bit to kind of warm up on the kind of stories you're going to tell for, you know, for this type of game. Having played a lot of fantasy and sci-fi and superheroes, it's like it's a new genre, and I was really struggling to wrap my brain around it.
Yeah, I have found that it's really easy for people to drop into, though. Like, if they're skeptical, like once you start telling that story and, you know, you get them to remember what it was like being a kid, then they just kind of, they buy into it right away, which is nice.
Yeah, we were talking, and he was talking about a game that they ran, and basically the GM just basically ripped off one of the Halloweens. I forget which one, the one with the masks. And essentially that's what it was. It was like a Halloween game, and the kids were turning into zombies because they were buying these masks that were like chronic. and something went haywire with a switch in them or something. I'm like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. You have to keep away from the zombies. You have to find out why they're turning into zombies. You have to figure out how to make them not zombies anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a mental block for me, which is weird because I've run a lot of different types of games.
Yeah, but it's definitely a different type of story than you're not wading into the cave and trying to stop the lich, or you're not doing necessarily the same tropes that you normally do. It's different for sure.
So Elfbait has a question. How much did you put into the book to help those who never actually lived in the period it takes place?
We've definitely been adding some more because that was some feedback that we got of people who, either A, didn't grow up in the suburbs necessarily, so they don't know what small town life was like in the 80s, or that didn't live in the 80s. The modules definitely help with that because those all do a good job of, describing what the individual towns are like and leading you directly into that.
So, also from Elfbait, he also wants to know, how do you guys address the same group of kids so that they continue having adventures together?
It's definitely, we built it to either be run as a one-shot or a campaign, so it works really well in either way. The way that we kind of address it is that, just like Stranger Things does, there's always somebody covering up the weird things that happen because they don't want everybody to know, what's behind the curtain. Yeah, you solved why the ghost was, turning people into slime or whatever, but that was last summer, and now it's this summer, and there's a new problem.
Basically, like any other game, pretty much is, you continually there's always new problems to solve. So our nerd editor in chief over at the website, Doug, is the game primarily like a mystery? Is there a background entity like the Loop or Hawkins National Laboratory?
No. So one of the things that we wanted to do to distinguish ourselves from Tales from the Loop, because I had backed that and gotten it, I think it delivered probably about 3 or 4 months into designing this. So like, okay, well, I can see, we already were on a different path than it, because Tales from the Loop is a little bit chunkier in the rules, and we're a little bit lighter. But we didn't want it to be there to be one setting or one definite thing. So we kind of left it up to the players to create those things, like what the Hawkins laboratory of your town is, or what your evil government agency is. And that way it's kind of different every time too.
So, you had already touched on the fact that, you do kind of like a Fate style or Apocalypse Engine style, where you collaboratively build the campaign that you guys are going to play in, the setting, the town in this case. So are there specific rules for that kind of stuff, or advice for creating the thing that's going to keep the adventures going? And is that part of the collaborative experience, or is that more of like the GM spot?
It's a little bit more on the GM, and we talked about it, but there are a few questions, and that's also part of the rumors of, like, what rumors have you heard about the town? Well, we heard that the electrical company is experimenting on people and things like that.
So, Caught Dingoes would like to know, is there death mechanics for the PCs?
We address it, and we talk about it being like a pretty serious thing. There really isn't any hit points in the game because, again, we're dealing with kids. And that's not really a thing that happens very often in those games, in those, kind of stories. But we do address it a little bit in the full book. I don't think it's in, let me look, I'm going to copy the ash can here. I don't think it's in the ash can, but we talk about it somewhat in the full book.
So, I mean, you have like this super kid or a super being that the party kind of controls. So, like, that kind of leads me to believe there are situations that, where there's going to be conflict, possibly violence. So, how is that stuff addressed? If it is it more of succeed or fail? Like, So what are the consequences for failure, I guess?
Well, so one of the nice things is the consequences for failure are pretty granular. There is, a chart that you use whenever you do a stat check that talks about like what the difficulty level should be and what the failure and success is. So like the other night when we played with Boards Alive, there's an altercation with a bully, and he was specifically picking on my character, who only had a D4 in fight. So I think the level of the check was like a 12 or something. But a lot of it depends on how the GM sets that level, because you have to have like a catastrophic failure for something really bad to happen to the character. And for a catastrophic failure to happen, you have to fail by like 15 or more. So unless the check is, more than 15, there's really no threat of death in that check. So that's, on the DM to decide when something that bad needs to happen. And even then, like, it has to be a really bad check, and you have to fail your roll by a lot. So like on a 15 or lower, the failure is staggering and catastrophic. There'll be both immediate and long-term consequences for the failure above and beyond what may be expected. They might lead to serious changes in the course of the long-term arc of the story, especially because the character should only find themselves failing this badly through total recklessness or because the GM has purposely put them in a staggering, difficult situation. So that's when the GM thinks that the story needs to go in that direction. They can use a check that's that, heavy to do.
Because I guess like if you use season one of Stranger Things as an example, there's like two different instances where where it would be life-threatening. Like the Demogorgon actually manifests and appears. That was definitely a time when something really, really bad could happen. But also there was other time when the woman from the lab shows up and she's essentially an assassin or a hit woman.
Yeah.
So it was very, very specific.
And then those moments are still important, and you need that kind of drama and stakes sometimes. But it's not like the kid. I mean, unless you're playing like a serial killer setting where the kids are, constantly being hunted down. Even then, like, you don't want the whole group to die. You want like other NPCs to die, so that the kids can survive and be able to talk about their adventures later on.
So I guess one of the different things that Tales from the Loop does is like there's scenes that are dedicated to like the non-weird stuff, like regular, a kid's regular life, maybe like going to school and stuff like that. And then there's the story stuff. Do you guys make any kind of differential between the adventuring life and the normal life, or is that part of the build for the campaign?
That's definitely part of the build. Like we played the other night in Doug's module, which is like I can't remember he uses a cartoon as a reference all the time, but it's like a small town that has like a tourist industry during the summer that kind of goes away during the fall. So the other night took place during the fall, so the town was kind of dead. It took place during the summer, so the school was out, but the town was very lively. So we didn't have to worry about school stuff, but like the first thing we did is we went to the magic and joke store, because that's where my character wanted to go, and we spent like half an hour trying to find a place to buy firecrackers because that's what we wanted to do. So we don't direct it like that, but it kind of naturally follows that flow anyways.
Because I feel like games like this, like kids on bikes and Tales from the Loop, it's really delving into basically a new genre that has been previously undiscovered, which is really odd. But that to think that there are even any genres that haven't been uncovered yet.
It's interesting and I think it's going to be very popular in the next couple of years, especially with Stranger Things. And I think the movie Super 8 really tried to bring it back, and I don't know why it failed so bad, because it was a pretty good movie.
I agree, and it just didn't have that mass appeal for whatever reason. They should have put it on Netflix. So Aaron Marks has a question. So money or currency and trade, how's it dealt with? The PCs trade comics, Bazooka Joe Gum, and now laters and soda pop as currency. What about
oh, absolutely. We hand wave a little bit of the way because, you know, we didn't want to worry about things like encumbrance and, you know, carrying money. There is like one of the stats you can pick is, you know, or not one of the stats, one of the character things you can pick is like you're the rich kid and money doesn't really matter. Like you always have access to the money that you need, but other kids are just assumed to have like a little bit of allowance to buy the things that they need. But it's going to run out. So, you know, you have like $4 or $5 on you and, you know, the GM kind of just treats it appropriately. You know, like we pool our money together to buy firecrackers because that's what felt appropriate in the story, you know, because it's going to be a thing that's harder to find. But yeah, it doesn't get down into the exact economics of it.
And that definitely seems like something we would have did back in the 80s as well.
Oh, absolutely.
AJ Kinney, how easy could you run a split timeline story, like where you switch between the characters as kids and the same characters as adults?
That sounds really interesting because right away somebody was like, can I run it with this game? And I don't think that's a problem. I think you could easily do it because all the mechanics are there. You would either switch between sessions or during the sessions, you know, the GM could easily be, all right, well, you know, we've hit a place right now where this story is going to stop and we're going to switch to what's happening in this other timeline. So it'd be pretty simple.
And it sounds like, too, because you have rules for playing, you know, whether you're kids or teenagers or adults. So that I imagine that would facilitate that. You'd just have like 2 character sheets for each time period or whatever. So
yeah, and that'd be really interesting to see like somebody create the same character and see what skills and things were different in them as an adult.
So guys,
yeah, that'd be really cool.
We're going to jump in the chat now and do our roll call, see where people are coming to us from. So weigh in the chat, keep asking your questions. Absolutely. And as always, guys, the links are in the description. You can go check out the Kickstarter. It is already funded. They're killing it. All those great authors that have been mentioned, they, you know, those stretch goals have been unlocked. So you guys will be able to get those rewards if you sign up at the appropriate level, which I'm sure first Kickstarter for RPG out the gate, that's got to feel good.
Oh, yeah.
So again, congratulations. So we got Todd coming to us from Dallas. We also have Dallas, which does everything. We got Patrick in Sweden. We got Lopez Island in Washington with AJ Kinney. We got Scotland in the house with Caught Dingoes. We've got Lincoln from Sweden in the house. We've got Doug in Cleveland. We've got Elfbait in Edmonds, Washington, Louisiana with Ghetto Stabulous. Rio Rancho, New Mexico with Shallender. Frigginator is relaxing in bed, someplace in Washington State, I imagine. Jinker GM is in Atlanta. We've got Sudbury, Ontario, Canada in the house with Gary Smith. Santa Barbara, California with Sean. We've got Lucha is in Fruitland Park, Florida. Texas in the house with Wet Bruck. Pennsylvania with Timothy. John Lachlan is Granite City, Illinois. And we got West Cliff-on-Sea, England in the house as well with Mike. Sacramento, California with Satori Shin. So as usual, we got people hanging with us from all over the place, and questions are also starting to flow back in. Staff editor Doug has a question here. Is the game packaged in a box like the awesome 80s box sets or books? I think it's books, but I'll leave it to you.
No, it's just going to be a single book.
The box set is dead. They don't get any love anymore.
They're nice sometimes. I really liked like the Paranoia box set and a couple other ones that I got. It's nice to have everything packaged together. But I hate when they don't fit everything. Like we're gonna have a stretch goal coming up that's some non-book stuff. And if the box doesn't fit it, then it's useless to me.
Yeah, well, that absolutely makes sense. I also heard like retailers don't like carrying box sets anymore. I forget who told me, but I guess somebody, one of the different publishers we've had on had said something along those lines. So, so we got a couple late roll callers. Ravens coming to us from the outback of the OZ. We got Party Wipe Gaming is in Phoenix, Arizona, and Aaron is in Seattle. So Aaron also has a question. Do you have local tree houses or rope swings, or the PCs crush on an older sibling? I guess, things in the game.
And they're not specific things in the game, but they're all things that have definitely manifested in different games of it that I've played. A lot of times the people will come up with like their own, clubhouse or wherever they meet up to get away from the adults. That happens in more games than it doesn't.
So how many hours you guys have in the play testing?
Oh man, I know I've done, oh boy, we should record it better. We've played it at almost every convention we went to this year, which for me has been like 15 or so, and I know Doug's went to a few that I haven't. And I know we've both played it with our local groups a bunch of times. So a few hundred hours easily.
So AJ Kinney's asking about solo play and how it runs with a player and a GM, if you guys have done any games like that.
Yeah, so we have done, and I assume by solo play you mean actually two-player, like a GM and a player.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, it works good. Like you're telling the story, a story like E.T. Where it's just the kid and the alien, or Flight of the Navigator. So there's definitely those tropes out there, and it works really well with two players, which is kind of important to us because I don't feel like there's enough RPGs that do. Like there's sometimes where I just want to play with one person, and that I don't have a lot of games that fit that.
Right, or we often get asked that question because people just don't have access to a lot of players, and they have one person to play with. How do you do this, with one player? Geek and Undies, how much crunch does Kids on Bikes have? Are the rules for Gadgetarian character like, say, Data from Goonies? Now, we touched on this a little bit as far as it being rules light.
Yeah, it's definitely low crunch, and that was kind of one of our goals. We wanted, since I knew that I had a little bit of following in the board game world, and we'd hopefully be bringing some people into it because of people who were fans of my work over there. We didn't want to throw a game at them that was super heavy and crunchy. We wanted to be, and the other thing is we wanted a game that we could really like sit down and explain to people in about 10 minutes because we wanted it to conventions. And when we, after the floor closes and it's like 11 o'clock at night and we get together with our friends at a convention, like we don't have time to teach somebody, this heavier system. We gotta do it, start the game, and get going. So it's a very low crunch. There's definitely those kind of things built into it. Like there are skills that you pick, and those skills have some one of the things is we kind of want to bring with my board game Dead of Winter. I wanted to bring some of the things that I love about RPGs into the board game realm, and with this, I wanted to bring some of the things that I love about board games into RPGs that I don't see happen a lot. So like one of the things is whenever you fail, you get these adversity tokens, which other games do, but then you can use those. And each one of the skills has a different thing that you can spend those adversity tokens for. So it's a little bit more granular than other systems where like the skills are just, they aid you in a check. They're all like individual player powers to make the players more asymmetric, which is kind of like a very board gamey thing.
So our nerd editor in chief, Doug, wow, great Kickstarter pledge deals. I'm in. So there's definitely people checking it out already.
Awesome,
AJ Kinney has another question. Can kids play the game? What is the youngest recommended age?
There are definitely a lot of people interested with playing it with younger kids, and that's fine because because the setting's pretty, there isn't a built-in setting. You're really able to make it whatever you would like. So you could play it with 8 or 9-year-olds, I think. I haven't had a chance to try it with my kids, and I probably should at some point. But my family doesn't ever like to play my games for some reason. I think because they think it's work for me, so they don't want to ask me to play my own games. But because the core rules are so easy, it's essentially when the GM, as long as the kid can read their sheet and know which die is which, they should be able to play it. Because it's like, oh, well, do a flight check. Okay, well, you pick up that die and roll it and tell the GM what you rolled. And that's the core mechanic.
I would love to do the campaign building with a group of like 8 or 9-year-olds. I'm sure that would be a blast.
Yeah, it would.
To see what crazy stuff they come up with. So for character design, Aaron's asking, are they set up like archetypes? Do you have archetypes beyond the rich kid skill or background? We had a break dancer, and we also had the kid with the mini bike, the kid with the overprotective mothers.
And again, those archetypes are just in there, and they're mostly in the Ashcan edition to help people get into the game faster while the Kickstarter is running. We just have blank character sheets in the book too, so you can make whatever you want. You don't have to play one of the archetypes that are already there. So you could totally make the breakdancer, or the rich kid who has a really sweet BMX, or whatever you'd like.
Awesome. So would you like to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff you've done and you do as well?
Sure. It's kind of fun doing these because of Kids on Bikes, because that's what I always talk about on podcasts. But I'm definitely more known for some of my board games. The big one is Dead of Winter, a Crossroads game, which, like I said, took a lot of the things I love about role-playing games and storytelling games and brought them into a board game form. A couple of my big releases this year, I came out with Dinosaur Island, which is a theme park building game where you're running a dinosaur theme park and breeding dinosaurs, and then they break out and eat the customers every day. I also had Wasteland Express Delivery Service, which is a game about being a post-apocalyptic truck driver in like this weird wasteland where you run around delivering goods and trying to keep the enclaves running. And then Path of Light and Shadow should be out pretty soon, which is kind of like a deck building and area control game, but it does both of those things in a pretty weird way, which are board game terms, so they may not mean a lot to some people, but it's an easy way to explain it to other board gamers.
Right. Well, I suspect a lot of our fans are also board gamers, in addition to playing, tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah. There's a lot of crossover there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Matter of fact, when I saw the stretch goals get unlocked, and I was like, oh, Betrayer, that's like one of my favorite tabletop games.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like, I tend to like things that play fast and easy, like Warriors and Smash Up and stuff like that. But of the more complex games, I would say Betrayer is probably my favorite.
I do love Betrayal, yeah. Have you picked up the new Betrayal at Baldur's Gate?
I have not picked that up yet. I did see them playing it live at Origins.
Yeah, it's definitely on my radar. I haven't got a chance to play it yet, but I'm looking
matter of fact, I interrupted Chris Perkins while they were playing, sort of. So they were playing the game, but then the Betrayer was announced. And like they all walked away from the table, so I didn't realize that they were still playing. Mm-hmm. And they had gone to see what their rules were, while Rudy Rutenberg was in front of the character explaining the rules for him as the Betrayer. So I imagine it's going to play just as great, just with the fantasy trappings.
I've heard a lot of people say that they liked it better.
Oh, really?
And I was like, I'm not sure how. Like,
huh? I wonder how much they changed to make that much different. I just assumed.
I know that they changed a lot.
Yeah, I assumed it was just aesthetics, unless maybe they.
I think some people were saying that they felt like the mechanics fit a little bit better.
Sweet. Yeah, it's definitely on my radar. But as you know, when you're making things, you have less time to enjoy things.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I mean, we were talking a little bit before we got started. And one of the questions, like we always ask, is, well, are you playing games? You know, and you're like, you know, you're playing more like pickup games than ongoing campaigns.
Yeah.
So it is the burden of being a content creator.
It's worth it though, man. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, we started Nerdarchy for an excuse to play more games. So as an adult, it's like literally like baked into my job now.
Yeah.
So do you have any projects in the pipeline for after Kids with RPGs? You going to do any more RPG stuff, or is it back into the board game world?
Well, so I have about 30 other board game projects that are in various stages right now. But I definitely would like to do some more role-playing game stuff if I can find. The thing that's really important to me is if I do something, I want to do something that's not being done already, which is, you know, one of the reasons we did Kids on Bike, because we felt that we could bring a different voice to it and approach it in a different way than other games were. Yeah, I don't think I would, and we didn't want to do like Powered by the Apocalypse, because we talked about it at one point of just making it a PTBA game. But in the board game world, like, you used to always recreating everything every time. But Doug did send me a document the other day about talking about some ideas for some more Kids on Bike stuff. So I'm definitely excited to work on those. And I think if the opportunity came along, I would definitely do more RPG stuff if I could find the right projects.
Yeah, that was definitely going to be my follow-up. Is, you know, you guys are planning on expanding this game anymore? Is there any ideas you could share and directions you would like to expand it if that was something to come to fruition?
I know that whenever a project is successful, that's an immediate talk that starts to happen. So we've definitely been brainstorming some ideas. I don't think they would like me to share any of them quite yet, though.
Okay, that's fine.
But I think we have some cool ideas.
So, Lucha Apocalypse. Oh, Dave, some fans in the chat, whether they know it or not.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that? It broke up there for a second.
Lucha Apocalypse. Oh, damn! I backed Dinosaur Island too.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
See,
should be getting to you pretty soon.
Because I know personally from personal experience, before I started doing these daily live chats, and getting more and doing Nerdarchy and getting more involved with, you know, with the industry side of things, I really didn't pay that much attention to the creators a lot of times. I'm embarrassed to say, and I just enjoyed the products.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you know, we had someone on, and I think they did a lot of like editing and stuff on a lot of the books, and I'm like, wow, I own so much of the stuff that you worked on, and I didn't even know who you were. I feel so embarrassed and ashamed now.
I think that's definitely a step in the fandom, right? Like, you start with just liking the thing, and then you start to learn, like, oh, who made the thing, and then eventually, like, in board games, like, I'm to the point where, like, I know the graphic designer on all these games, and if this graphic designer did the game, it's going to be well laid out, so I should probably look into it. So I think it's part of that hierarchy of fandom,
the evolution, if you would.
Yeah.
So we are getting close to the hour mark. Is there anything you want to leave people with?
Oh man, I mean, this has been great. I hope everybody gets a chance to check out the game. If you're on the edge, there's the Ashcan edition that you can download for free and try out while the campaign's running. That was real important to me, was to make sure that people could, and especially since it's my first time designing an RPG, I want to be able to, prove to people before they put their money on the table that, we were happy with the product.
Where can they find that? I actually did not see that when I was putting links in the description.
It's linked directly on the Kickstarter page. So if you scroll down, let me see where it says it. It's between it says "Rip Ready" and "Raring to Go." We just need you. There's even an early access PDF or Ashcan version of the rules available now. So it's about halfway down the page. I'll mention to him to make it a little bit more prominent towards the top.
Okay, well, I'll grab it and I will put it directly in the description. This way, people can go right to it, check it out, look it out before they go. And
that'd be perfect.
And I'm looking. Yeah. I was looking earlier. I think it jumped up a little bit. So
yeah, I hadn't checked it since last night, but we're just about ready to break 40K,
which is awesome. Do we have a 40K stretch goal yet, or do we need one?
We don't. We put up more stretch goals over the weekend, and we met them all over the weekend. So we are scrambling to do the next set of stretch goals.
You guys are crushing it.
Yeah, we definitely were not quite expecting it.
Definitely in the special edition hardback for sure.
Oh, well, and I'm excited. We just started Heather on working on the cover for it, and I pitched the idea for the cover to Doug, and he's super excited for it. So we haven't revealed it yet, but we will as soon as she's done with it.
Nice. So I want to thank everyone for hanging out with us today. I want to thank you for jumping on, John. Greatly appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You have an invitation to come back whenever you like. You've got stuff going on. And with that, until next time, guys, stay nerdy.